The stunned faces of everyone in the first-class cabin froze as Vanessa Montgomery signed the final acquisition papers. The same flight attendant who had dragged her daughter Zoe's designer backpack down the aisle just minutes ago, calling it out of place and suspicious, now stood paralyzed at the front of the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pilot's voice trembled over the intercom, "I'd like to introduce the new owner of Meridian Airlines." Vanessa locked eyes with the flight attendant who had humiliated her child. This was just the beginning. How far would a mother go to right the wrongs of discrimination that her child faced? Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you believe in justice and standing up against discrimination, hit that like button and subscribe to see more powerful stories of triumph over adversity. 12-year-old Zoe Montgomery fidgeted with her seatbelt as Meridian Airlines Flight 437 prepared for departure from Atlanta to San Francisco. Her mother, Vanessa, settled into her first-class seat several rows ahead, an arrangement neither of them had planned. A last-minute booking error had separated them, placing Vanessa in first class where she needed to take an urgent business call, while Zoe sat in Economy Plus. Despite her considerable wealth as a tech venture capitalist worth billions, Vanessa typically traveled modestly with her daughter, believing it taught important lessons about humility and the value of money. Today was supposed to be no different except for that unavoidable call. "I'll switch with you right after my call ends, sweetheart," Vanessa had promised, giving Zoe's hand a reassuring squeeze before they boarded. "It won't take more than 30 minutes." Zoe nodded bravely, clutching her purple designer backpack, a birthday gift from her mother that she treasured above all her possessions. As passengers continued filing into the plane, Zoe stood to place her backpack in the overhead bin. That's when flight attendant Karen Patterson first noticed her. Karen's eyes narrowed as she watched the young black girl carefully arranging the expensive-looking bag in the overhead compartment. Without hesitation, she marched down the aisle toward Zoe. "Excuse me," Karen said, her voice carrying an edge that made nearby passengers look up. "Are you sure you're in the right section? Let me see your boarding pass." Zoe's cheeks burned as she fumbled in her pocket for her ticket. "I'm in the right seat," she answered softly, presenting her boarding pass to Karen. Karen scrutinized the ticket with obvious skepticism. Her gaze shifted between the boarding pass and the designer backpack. "And that bag belongs to you?" she asked, emphasizing the word "you" in a way that made Zoe's stomach twist. "Yes, ma'am," Zoe replied, her voice growing smaller as she felt the stares of other passengers. "My mom gave it to me for my birthday." "And where is your mother?" Karen's tone suggested she didn't believe Zoe. "She's in first class. She has an important business call, but she's coming back here afterward." Karen's expression hardened. "First class? I see." The disbelief in her voice was unmistakable. "Well, that bag looks out of place here. We need to move it." Zoe glanced around at the overhead bins, which still had plenty of space. "But there's room, and I followed all the rules about putting it up there." "I don't make the rules. I just enforce them," Karen snapped, reaching for the backpack. She roughly pulled it from the bin, handling the expensive item as if it were a suspicious package. "This needs to be moved." "Please be careful with that," Zoe pleaded, her voice cracking. "Can I please call my mom?" "If you cause a scene," Karen threatened in a low voice that only Zoe could hear, "I'll have you removed from this flight. Do you understand me?" Tears welled in Zoe's eyes as she watched Karen drag her precious backpack down the aisle, treating it like contraband. The other passengers awkwardly averted their gaze, pretending not to notice the young girl's humiliation. One white woman started to say something, then thought better of it, and buried her face in a magazine. Zoe sat down, her hands trembling. She wondered what she had done wrong. The backpack had fit in the bin. She had been quiet and polite. Yet somehow, she had been singled out, her belongings treated differently than everyone else's. As the plane began to taxi, Zoe fought back tears, feeling more alone than she ever had before. Vanessa Montgomery wrapped up her business call earlier than expected. The tech investment opportunity could wait. Her motherly instincts told her to check on Zoe. As she made her way from first class to economy, she had no idea that she was walking into a situation that would change not just their day, but their entire lives. When Vanessa saw Zoe's tear-streaked face, her heart dropped. "Sweetheart, what happened?" she asked, immediately kneeling beside her daughter's seat. Between sobs, Zoe explained how Karen had treated her, questioned whether she belonged, and removed her backpack despite ample overhead space. Vanessa's expression darkened with each detail. She'd experienced discrimination before, but seeing her daughter subjected to it ignited something fierce within her. With measured calm that belied her inner fury, Vanessa stood and looked for the flight attendant who had upset her child. She spotted Karen at the front of the economy cabin and approached her with professional poise. "Excuse me," Vanessa said. "I'd like to discuss how you treated my daughter and her belongings." Karen's demeanor instantly shifted to defensive. "I was following standard procedures," she replied curtly. "Certain items and certain types of passengers require additional scrutiny for everyone's safety." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Certain types? Could you clarify what you mean by that?" "Look, I don't have to explain myself to you," Karen snapped. "If that girl claims you're her mother, that's a very convenient story. But I've heard similar tales before." "Convenient story?" Vanessa repeated, her voice still controlled despite the insulting implication. "I am Zoe's mother, and I'm concerned about how you've singled her out." Instead of addressing Vanessa's concerns, Karen reached for her communication device. "Bradley, I need assistance in economy," she spoke into it. Within moments, Chief Purser Bradley Williams arrived, his tall frame creating an imposing presence. "What seems to be the problem?" Bradley asked, immediately positioning himself beside Karen in a show of solidarity. Before Vanessa could fully explain, Karen jumped in. "This woman is causing a disturbance over standard luggage procedures." "Sir," Vanessa began, maintaining her composure, "your colleague removed my daughter's properly stored backpack, questioned whether she belonged in her assigned seat, and insinuated the bag wasn't hers. When I mentioned I was her mother, your colleague suggested I was lying." Bradley didn't even pretend to consider Vanessa's side. "Ma'am, our crew has the final say on all safety matters on this aircraft. If you continue this disturbance, we'll be forced to remove you at our next stop." Other crew members began gathering around, creating a wall of unified opposition against Vanessa. The situation was escalating rapidly. From several rows back, a white passenger who had witnessed the original interaction stood up. "Excuse me," the woman said, "but I saw what happened. The girl wasn't doing anything wrong. Her bag fit fine in the bin." Bradley barely glanced at the woman before turning back to Vanessa. "Ma'am, I need you to return to your seat immediately." Vanessa, still calm but resolute, pulled out her phone. "I'd like your employee IDs, please. I'm documenting this interaction." Bradley's face flushed with anger. "Recording is against airline policy. I'll have to confiscate that phone." "You will do no such thing," Vanessa replied, her voice finally taking on an edge of steel. "This is my personal property, and I have every right to document what's happening." The standoff intensified, with other passengers now openly watching the confrontation. Just as it seemed the situation might spiral completely out of control, a new voice entered the fray. "What's going on back here?" Captain Reynolds had emerged from the cockpit, alerted by the growing tension in his aircraft. "Have you ever experienced or witnessed discrimination that made your blood boil?" Comment number 1. If you believe what Karen did was absolutely unacceptable. Comment number 2. If you think Vanessa handled this confrontation the right way. And hit that like button if you admire a mother who stands up for her child against injustice. Subscribe to see more stories of people fighting back against discrimination in powerful ways. But what will Captain Reynolds do now that he's entered this volatile situation? Will he side with his crew or recognize the clear discrimination happening on his aircraft? Captain Reynolds surveyed the tense scene before him, his experienced eyes taking in Vanessa's controlled anger, Zoe's tear-stained face, and the defensive posture of his crew. Unlike Karen and Bradley, he seemed to recognize the importance of de-escalation. "Let's all take a breath," he said, his authoritative voice immediately commanding attention. "I apologize for any misunderstanding that may have occurred. Vanessa noted his careful choice of words. Misunderstanding, neatly sidestepped, acknowledging the racial component of the incident. It was the kind of diplomatic language that addressed the situation without admitting fault. "Captain," she replied evenly. "This was not a misunderstanding. My daughter was singled out and humiliated because of how she looks." The captain maintained his professional demeanor. "Without getting into specifics, I'd like to offer a solution. We'd be happy to move your daughter to first class to join you for the remainder of the flight. Would that be acceptable?" Vanessa considered her options. She could escalate further, demanding proper acknowledgement of the discrimination Zoe had faced, but she looked at her daughter's exhausted face and made her decision. "That would be acceptable for now," she replied, emphasizing the last two words just enough for the captain to understand this wasn't the end of the matter. Captain Reynolds nodded. "Bradley, please help relocate the young lady's belongings to first class." Bradley's jaw tightened, but he complied with a curt, "Yes, sir." As he retrieved Zoe's backpack, he handled it with exaggerated care now that he knew Vanessa was watching. As they settled into their first-class seats side by side, Vanessa put her arm around Zoe's shoulders. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Zoe leaned against her mother. "Why did they treat me like that, Mom? I didn't do anything wrong." The simplicity of the question broke Vanessa's heart. How do you explain systemic racism to a 12-year-old who should be worrying about school projects and friend drama, not defending her right to exist in a space? "You didn't do anything wrong," Vanessa assured her. "Some people have problems in their hearts that make them treat others unfairly. But I'm here now, and I won't let anyone make you feel less than the amazing person you are." As she comforted her daughter, Vanessa noticed the curious glances from other first-class passengers. Some looked sympathetic, others seemed annoyed by the disruption. One businessman openly stared at them as if questioning their presence in the premium cabin. While Zoe closed her eyes, trying to recover from the ordeal, Vanessa overheard Bradley and Karen speaking in hushed tones near the galley. "Those people always play the race card," Karen muttered, "acting like they own the place." "Don't worry," Bradley replied. "I'm filing a report. We'll document that they were the disruptive ones. No one questions our crew and gets away with it." Their voices drifted away as they moved toward the back of the plane, but their words had already ignited something in Vanessa. She pulled out her tablet and began researching Meridian Airlines with the plane's Wi-Fi, her fingers moving rapidly across the screen. What she discovered troubled her deeply. Dozens of similar complaints about discriminatory treatment had been filed against the airline over the past few years. Most had been dismissed or settled quietly with minimal consequences. The company culture, according to anonymous employee reviews, protected those accused of discrimination, especially if they had seniority. Vanessa's expression hardened as she continued reading. Without drawing attention, she sent several text messages to her business partners, cryptic instructions that would set significant events in motion. When Karen eventually came through the first-class cabin with the beverage cart, she deliberately skipped Vanessa and Zoe's row, moving on to serve the next passenger. "Excuse me," said an elderly white woman sitting across the aisle. "I believe you missed serving these ladies." Karen's smile became a grimace as she was forced to backtrack. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice dripping with barely concealed contempt. "Water for both of us, please," Vanessa replied pleasantly, maintaining her dignity despite the flight attendant's obvious disdain. As Karen roughly placed their drinks on their tray tables, sloshing water over the sides, Vanessa caught her eye and held her gaze for a long moment. Karen looked away first, a small victory that gave Vanessa a measure of satisfaction. What neither Karen nor Bradley knew was that Vanessa Montgomery wasn't just any passenger. She was one of the most successful venture capitalists in the tech industry, with billions at her disposal and connections throughout the business world. And now, as the plane continued its journey westward, she was formulating a plan that would forever change Meridian Airlines and the people who had humiliated her daughter. The jet bridge extended to meet Flight 437 as it arrived at San Francisco International Airport. Passengers began the familiar routine of gathering belongings and shuffling toward the exits. Vanessa and Zoe waited patiently, allowing the most eager travelers to disembark first. They had no reason to rush, or so they thought. "Ms. Montgomery?" A man in a Meridian Airlines security uniform appeared at their row. Behind him stood another airline security officer and a San Francisco police officer. "We need you and your daughter to come with us." Vanessa's expression remained neutral, though her mind raced. "May I ask why?" "We've received a report of disruptive behavior during the flight," the security officer replied. "We just need to ask you a few questions." Several remaining passengers slowed their departure, watching the scene unfold. Zoe's hand found her mother's, squeezing tightly. "Of course," Vanessa replied calmly. "We're happy to cooperate." As they were escorted through the terminal to a small office, Vanessa noticed the police officer studying them with increasing skepticism. When they reached the private room, he pulled the airline security officers aside for a brief conversation before approaching Vanessa. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Ramirez," he said. "The flight attendants have filed a report claiming you and your daughter were disruptive and threatening during the flight. However," he glanced at Zoe's tear-streaked face and Vanessa's composed demeanor, "I'm having trouble reconciling that with what I'm seeing." "Officer," Vanessa began, "my daughter's backpack was removed without cause. She was spoken to disrespectfully, and when I inquired about it, we were threatened with removal from the flight. I have portions of the interaction recorded on my phone." Officer Ramirez's eyebrows raised slightly. Before he could respond, commotion erupted outside the office door. Several passengers from the flight had gathered, phones raised. "We saw what happened," a woman called out. "They're the ones being harassed, not the other way around." "I got it all on video," another passenger added. The flight attendants were way out of line. A murmur spread through the growing crowd. Then, someone gasped in recognition. "Wait, aren't you Vanessa Montgomery, the investor behind Tech Future and Quantum Solutions?" A ripple of recognition passed through the group. Though Vanessa typically maintained a low public profile, her reputation in tech circles was legendary. Smartphones appeared as people began recording the confrontation and sharing it on social media in real time. Officer Ramirez, sensing the shifting dynamics, turned back to Vanessa. "Ms. Montgomery, I don't think we need to continue this questioning. You and your daughter are free to go with my apologies for the inconvenience." The airline security officers looked uncomfortable as they backed away. News was traveling fast. Meridian Airlines was already trending on social media platforms. As they left the airport, Vanessa's phone rang. The display showed her chief financial officer's name. "Tell me you've seen it," Jerome said without preamble when she answered. "Seen what?" Vanessa asked, guiding Zoe toward their waiting car. Meridian Airlines' parent company is in serious financial trouble. Their quarterly report leaked early. Massive losses, 3 discrimination lawsuits they've been hiding from shareholders, and a credit downgrade. Their stock is in free fall. They're desperately seeking emergency investors to stay afloat. Vanessa stopped walking, the synchronicity of this information striking her forcefully. Most people would see this moment as an opportunity to file yet another discrimination complaint that would likely be settled quietly and forgotten. But Vanessa Montgomery had never been like most people. "Jerome," she said, her voice taking on the steely quality her business associates recognized as her most dangerous tone. "I want you to convene the investment team immediately. I need you to position us for a hostile takeover." "A hostile takeover?" Jerome repeated. "Of Meridian Airlines? Vanessa, what happened on that flight?" "I'll explain everything when I see you," Vanessa replied. "Just get things in motion fast." As she ended the call, Zoe looked up at her mother. "What are we going to do, Mom?" Vanessa knelt down to her daughter's eye level, a small smile playing at her lips. "We're going to buy an airline, sweetheart." In the car driving away from the airport, Vanessa's mind raced with possibilities. This wouldn't be a simple discrimination lawsuit that would be buried by corporate lawyers. This would be a complete reconstruction of a company that had allowed racism to fester within its culture. And it would begin with the very flight attendant who had dragged her daughter's backpack down the aisle. The glass-walled conference room on the 32nd floor of Montgomery Ventures buzzed with activity as Vanessa's team executed her vision with military precision. Multiple screens displayed financial data, stock trends, and news feeds tracking Meridian Airlines' rapidly deteriorating position. "We've already acquired 7% of their shares through various shell companies," Jerome reported, sliding a tablet toward Vanessa. "At the current rate, we could reach a controlling interest within 14 days. Vanessa nodded, her eyes scanning the complex financial projections. "Faster if possible. I want this done before they realize what's happening." But 15 miles away, in Meridian Airlines corporate headquarters, alarms were already sounding. CEO Richard Whitman slammed his hand down on his mahogany desk as his financial advisor delivered the news. "What do you mean unusual stock movements?" he demanded. "Who's buying us out?" The advisor adjusted his glasses nervously. "It's complicated. The purchases are coming through multiple channels, but our analysts have traced patterns suggesting Montgomery Ventures might be behind it." Richard's face paled. "Vanessa Montgomery, the tech investor?" He quickly typed her name into his computer, scanning recent news. The trending social media posts about the incident on Flight 437 appeared immediately. His expression darkened as he connected the dots. "Get the board on the line now and find out everything you can about Vanessa Montgomery." Within hours, an emergency board meeting convened. Richard paced at the head of the table, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, "we're facing a threat to our company's independence. Vanessa Montgomery, a tech venture capitalist with no experience in the airline industry, is attempting to acquire controlling interest in our company." "What's her angle?" asked a board member. "Airlines aren't exactly tech sector targets." Richard displayed the viral video from Flight 437. "This is her angle. Her daughter had a minor interaction with our flight crew yesterday. Now she's on some emotional crusade." He carefully framed the narrative, describing the incident as a routine security procedure that was being weaponized by an emotional mother. The racial component was deliberately minimized, painted as an unfortunate misunderstanding rather than discrimination. "We need to implement defensive measures immediately," Richard continued. "I'm proposing a poison pill strategy to make our stock prohibitively expensive should any single entity exceed a 10% ownership stake." The board approved the measure, but Richard wasn't finished. As the meeting concluded, he pulled his head of security and chief legal counsel aside. "I want everything on Montgomery," he instructed. "Pressure points, vulnerabilities, anything we can use. This isn't just business anymore." The first warning came to Vanessa that evening via an encrypted email. "Back off Meridian or face consequences." She forwarded it to her security team without comment and continued working. By morning, the escalation was swift and vicious. Vanessa's personal information had been leaked online. Anonymous threats flooded her social media accounts. Zoe's school called. They'd received a security threat that mentioned her by name. "We need to relocate you and Zoe temporarily," her security chief advised. "Your home address has been compromised." Within hours, they moved to a secure penthouse owned by Montgomery Ventures. As Zoe tried to adjust to their temporary home, Vanessa received word of the next attack. Financial publications were running pieces questioning her business acumen, with thinly veiled sexist and racist undertones suggesting her success was due to tokenism rather than skill. "They're claiming you're unstable," Jerome reported, showing her the headlines. "That this is an emotional vendetta that will destroy shareholder value." Vanessa skimmed the articles, noting the quotes from anonymous sources close to the company, who described her as dangerous and unhinged. "They're scared," she observed calmly. "Good." The attacks continued to escalate. Regulatory agencies suddenly announced audits of Vanessa's other business ventures. A defamation lawsuit was filed against her by Meridian, claiming she had fabricated discrimination claims to manipulate stock prices. In her secure penthouse office, Vanessa took a video call from her legal team. "They're pulling out all the stops," her chief counsel explained. "This isn't standard corporate defense. It's personal." "Of course it's personal," Vanessa replied. "They just didn't expect me to have the resources to fight back." She glanced at a photo of Zoe on her desk. The incident that had triggered this war had been personal too. A young black girl humiliated for daring to own something nice, for occupying space someone thought she didn't deserve. As Richard Whitman mobilized every resource at his disposal to maintain control of Meridian Airlines, he failed to understand a fundamental truth about his opponent. Vanessa Montgomery hadn't built a billion-dollar investment empire by backing down from bullies. Have you ever seen someone underestimate a person because of their race or gender? Comment number 1 if you think Richard is making a massive mistake by dismissing Vanessa as just an emotional mother. Comment number 2 if you believe corporate giants should be held accountable when discrimination happens under their watch. If you're fired up seeing Vanessa fight back against this systematic bullying, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories of underdogs turning the tables on powerful opponents. But with threats now targeting her child, will Vanessa be forced to back down to protect Zoe? Or does she have another card to play in this increasingly dangerous game? The video began with a shaky frame, clearly filmed discreetly by a passenger, showing Karen Patterson roughly handling Zoe's backpack while telling the clearly distressed child to sit down. It captured Karen's dismissive tone, the unnecessary scrutiny, and most damningly, her threat to remove Zoe from the flight for causing a scene when the girl was clearly just confused and upset. Within 4 hours of being posted, the clip had been viewed 17 million times. By morning, it was inescapable. News channels played edited versions on repeat. Social media platforms were flooded with outraged comments. Boycott Meridian became the top trending hashtag globally, followed closely by Dar Justice for Zoe and Daesh Flying While Black. In Meridian's emergency response room, Richard Whitman watched the corporate disaster unfold in real time. "Get me damage control options," he snapped at his public relations team. "And someone find Karen Patterson and Bradley Williams. They need media training before they speak to anyone." But it was already too late. A local news station had ambushed Karen in the parking lot of her apartment complex. "The company has procedures," she told the reporter defensively, the camera capturing her irritated expression. "Some passengers require extra scrutiny. That's just reality in today's world." "Are you suggesting certain races require more scrutiny?" the reporter pressed. Karen's eyes widened as she realized her mistake. "That's not what I meant," she backpedaled. "It's about behavior, not race." The video shows a quiet 12-year-old girl placing her backpack in an overhead bin with plenty of space. "What behavior warranted your intervention?" Karen's flustered response. "You weren't there. You don't understand the context." Only fueled the growing firestorm. Bradley's interview went even worse. Attempted to defend both himself and Karen, he inadvertently revealed the airline's unwritten policies. "We have to make judgment calls for passenger safety," he explained. "Sometimes that means profiling based on certain indicators." When asked to specify these indicators, he stumbled through a response that managed to offend multiple demographic groups simultaneously. As the public relations disaster intensified, Meridian's stock plummeted another 23%. Corporate partners began issuing statements distancing themselves from the airline. 3 major companies suspended their corporate travel contracts pending review. The crisis deepened as past passengers, emboldened by the viral story, began sharing their own experiences of discrimination on Meridian flights. What had been isolated incidents now formed a damning pattern that couldn't be dismissed as coincidence or misunderstanding. Richard's assistant interrupted his crisis meeting with breaking news. "Sir, Montgomery Ventures has acquired another 8% of our shares through a subsidiary in Singapore. They're now our largest single shareholder." Richard's face flushed with anger. "Get Vanessa Montgomery on the phone. Now." When they connected, Richard's tone was conciliatory, despite his clenched jaw. "Ms. Montgomery, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We at Meridian take discrimination very seriously. I'd like to offer a settlement and a public apology to put this unfortunate incident behind us." Vanessa's voice was cool and measured. "Mr. Whitman, this isn't about a settlement. This is about systemic issues within your corporate culture. We're announcing mandatory diversity training for all staff," Richard countered desperately. "I can assure you we're committed to improvement." "Performative gestures won't address the root problem," Vanessa replied. but I appreciate the call. My acquisition team will be in touch with your board." The line went dead, leaving Richard staring at the phone in disbelief. No one refused settlement offers from major corporations. No one dismissed Richard Whitman. As Meridian scrambled to contain the damage, online sleuths began digging deeper into the airline's history. They uncovered forum posts from employees, describing a toxic work environment where reporting discrimination was career suicide. Former workers shared stories of being fired after filing complaints about racist incidents. Financial journalists discovered previously unreported settlements with passengers who had experienced similar treatment. A major celebrity with 50 million followers canceled her partnership with Meridian, posting, "I cannot in good conscience continue to represent a company that treats children this way. Boycott Meridian." The pressure intensified on Zoe as well. At her private school, children of airline executives whispered when she passed in the hallways. Some avoided her entirely. But rather than breaking under the pressure, Zoe found her voice. With Vanessa's permission, she recorded a simple 2-minute video sharing her experience and how it made her feel. "I didn't understand what I did wrong," she said with quiet dignity beyond her years. "I still don't, because I didn't do anything wrong. No child should be made to feel like they don't belong somewhere because of how they look." Her heartfelt message resonated far beyond the original incident, connecting with millions who had experienced similar treatment. In less than a day, Zoe's video received twice the views of the original airplane footage. As Vanessa watched her daughter transform from victim to advocate, she felt a complex mix of pride and sadness. No child should have to develop such resilience so young. But Zoe's courage only strengthened her resolve to see this fight through to the end, no matter what obstacles Richard Whitman might throw in their path next. Richard Whitman stared at the confidential file his private investigators had compiled on Vanessa Montgomery. One detail in particular caught his attention. 27 years ago, Vanessa's father, James Montgomery, had died of a heart attack during a confrontation with flight attendants on National Airways, which had later been acquired by Meridian. The incident had occurred after James, a successful accountant, had been repeatedly asked to move from his first-class seat despite having a valid ticket. "This is it," Richard murmured, a slow smile spreading across his face. "This isn't about her daughter at all. It's personal vendetta over something that happened decades ago." He wasted no time leaking the information to sympathetic journalists. By afternoon, headlines questioned Vanessa's motives. Montgomery's airline takeover, justice for daughter or revenge for father. The stories painted her as emotionally compromised, using her financial power to settle an old family score rather than addressing genuine discrimination. Vanessa's phone rang continuously as reporters sought comment on the new angle. She declined all interviews, focusing instead on advancing her acquisition strategy. But the attacks were just beginning. That evening, security cameras captured 3 masked individuals spray painting racial slurs on the walls of Montgomery Ventures' main office building. The vandals escaped before police arrived, but the message was clear. The gloves were off. The next morning, Zoe found threatening messages in her school email account, though the school's IT department quickly deleted them and traced their origin to a coffee shop near Meridian's headquarters. The damage was done. Zoe's hands shook as she showed her mother the screenshots she'd taken. "Maybe we should stop," Zoe whispered. "It's getting scary." Vanessa pulled her daughter close. "Is that what you really want, to let them win?" Zoe thought for a moment, then straightened her shoulders. "No, they shouldn't get away with treating people like this." "Then we continue," Vanessa said, "but with extra precautions." While Vanessa increased security around her family, Richard launched an economic offensive. He arranged meetings with the venture capital firms that partnered with Montgomery Ventures, subtly threatening economic consequences if they continued supporting Vanessa's irrational crusade. Several of Vanessa's banking partners received similar pressure, with veiled suggestions that regulatory scrutiny might intensify if they maintained their relationship with Montgomery Ventures. One by one, meeting invitations were canceled. Funding, partners grew hesitant. Business allies became suddenly unreachable. In a particularly bold move, Richard personally approached key members of Vanessa's executive team, offering them lucrative positions at Meridian-affiliated companies, if they would abandon ship at this critical moment. Vanessa's on a suicide mission, he told Jerome during a clandestine meeting. She's willing to burn everything down for this personal vendetta. You don't need to go down with her. Jerome recorded the conversation and immediately played it for Vanessa. He's getting desperate, he observed. Yes, Vanessa agreed, and desperate people make mistakes. The most concerning escalation came when Vanessa's security team discovered sophisticated listening devices in both their temporary residence and the Montgomery Ventures offices. The technology was military-grade, unavailable to the general public. Someone with serious connections wanted to know Vanessa's every move. Then came the incident that nearly broke Vanessa's resolve. While being driven to school, the car carrying Zoe was forced off the road by a black SUV that immediately sped away. Though no one was injured, the message couldn't have been clearer. This fight could cost more than money. For the first time since the confrontation began, Vanessa considered backing down. She sat alone in her office that night, weighing the risks against the principles at stake. Her security team had traced the listening devices to a private intelligence firm with connections to a board member at Meridian. The accident with Zoe's car remained under investigation, but the timing was too perfect for coincidence. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Zoe entered, still in her pajamas despite the late hour. "I can't sleep," she admitted. "I keep thinking about what happened today." Vanessa patted the space beside her on the couch. "I've been thinking, too. Maybe this has gone too far. Your safety matters more than anything." Zoe was quiet for a moment. "Remember when you told me about Grandpa? How he stood up for himself on that plane, even though it cost him everything?" Vanessa nodded, throat tight with emotion. "You said he would have done it again, even knowing what would happen, because standing up for your dignity is never wrong." Zoe took her mother's hand. "I don't want to stop fighting, not when they're still doing this to other people." In that moment, Vanessa saw her father's strength mirrored in her daughter's eyes. 3 generations bound by the same struggle, the same resilience. "Okay," she said finally, "but we changed tactics. Richard wants to fight dirty. He has no idea who he's dealing with." The private dining room of San Francisco's most exclusive restaurant had been reserved under a false name. Security personnel discreetly checked for electronic devices at the entrance, ensuring complete privacy for the meeting about to take place. Vanessa sat at the head of the table, reviewing documents as her guests arrived one by one. First came Eliza Chen, CEO of Pacific Skies, a regional airline that had long struggled against Meridian's predatory business practices. Next was Marcus Johnson, former executive at Meridian who had been forced out after attempting to implement diversity initiatives. They were followed by representatives from 3 minority business alliances, 2 institutional investors with significant airline holdings, and a renowned civil rights attorney. "Thank you all for coming despite the risks," Vanessa began once everyone was settled. "We're here because Meridian Airlines represents something bigger than one discrimination incident. It's emblematic of systemic issues that have gone unchallenged for too long." She laid out her vision, not just acquiring Meridian, but transforming it into an industry model for inclusivity and ethical leadership. The alliance she proposed would combine their resources, influence, and expertise to not only succeed in the takeover, but implement lasting change. "Richard Whitman has powerful friends," Marcus warned. "He's leveraging those connections against you already. That's why I need allies with different strengths," Vanessa acknowledged. "Together, we create pressure points he can't anticipate or counter." As the meeting progressed, Vanessa's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Need to meet. Have internal documents. Baggage claim C, SFO, locker 342. Password, Justice for Zoe." 3 hours later, Vanessa's security team had verified and collected a flash drive containing years of internal communications from Meridian's executive team. The whistleblower, a mid-level HR manager tired of covering up discrimination complaints, had meticulously documented the company's pattern of burying incidents and retaliating against employees who spoke up. "This is dynamite," Jerome said as they reviewed the files. "Direct evidence of systematic discrimination, signed off by Richard himself." The whistleblower was just the first. As word spread about Vanessa's alliance, Others came forward. Former flight attendants shared stories of being instructed to give extra scrutiny to passengers of color, especially in premium cabins. Customer service representatives revealed scripts for handling discrimination complaints that focused on protecting the company rather than addressing the issues. Each new revelation strengthened Vanessa's position. Her legal team carefully compiled the evidence, building an irrefutable case that Meridian's problems weren't isolated incidents, but institutional failures. Meanwhile, her alliance partners activated their own networks. The minority business organizations launched campaigns, highlighting alternative airlines with better diversity records. The institutional investors began quietly discussing their concerns with other major Meridian shareholders. Eliza Chen offered preferential hiring to any Meridian employees who wanted to escape the toxic culture. The civil rights attorney, Sophia Washington, identified sympathetic board members at Meridian who might be swayed with the right approach. Devin Taylor and Michelle Ramos have consistently voted for more progressive policies, Sophia reported. They've been outnumbered, but they might be allies if given the chance. Vanessa arranged private meetings with both board members, sharing select pieces of evidence from the whistleblower files. Neither committed immediately, but their disturbed expressions told her they were reconsidering their allegiances. The alliance grew stronger when California State Senator James Wilson publicly called for a legislative investigation into discrimination at major airlines, citing the Zoe Montgomery incident as a tipping point. His announcement coincided with a leaked memo from the Securities and Exchange Commission, revealing a preliminary investigation into whether Meridian had misled shareholders by concealing discrimination settlements that materially affected the company's financial position. Richard Whitman's counterattacks grew increasingly desperate. He fired 3 employees suspected of being whistleblowers. He demanded loyalty oaths from his executive team. He even attempted to pressure Vanessa's daughter's school into finding reasons to expel Zoe. But for every attack, the alliance had a counter. When Richard pressured business partners, Vanessa's institutional investor allies reminded those same partners of the reputational risks of siding with a company under SEC investigation. When he planted negative stories in the media, Sophia Washington's team responded with first-person accounts from discrimination victims that garnered far more public sympathy. Even Zoe played her part, becoming the face of a new foundation Vanessa established, dedicated to fighting discrimination in the travel industry. Her poise and eloquence in speaking about her experience inspired supporters across demographic lines. Donations and volunteer offers flooded in, creating a groundswell of public support that corporate money couldn't match. As the battle intensified, a crucial shift occurred when financial analysts began questioning Richard's leadership. What had started as a PR crisis had evolved into a governance issue that threatened Meridian's very survival. Stock prices continued to fall as investors lost confidence, not in the airline itself, but in the management team that had created such vulnerability. In her secure office, Vanessa reviewed the latest acquisition numbers with Jerome. "We're approaching 40% ownership," he reported. "Another 10% would give us effective control." Vanessa nodded, studying the shareholder breakdown. Richard's called an emergency meeting for next Thursday. He's going to try to consolidate power before we can acquire more shares. "Are we ready?" Jerome asked. Vanessa smiled for the first time in days. "More than ready. It's time to end this." Are you inspired by how Vanessa built this powerful alliance? Comment number 1 if you believe in the power of people coming together to fight injustice. Comment number 2 if you've ever witnessed the strength that comes from uniting against discrimination. Hit that like button if you're amazed by Zoe's courage in becoming a young advocate after what she experienced. Subscribe to see more stories of strategic resistance against powerful opponents. But what will happen at the emergency shareholder meeting? Does Richard have one last trick up his sleeve, or will Vanessa's alliance finally bring justice to Meridian Airlines? The Meridian Airlines corporate headquarters gleamed in the morning sunlight, its glass facade reflecting the clear blue sky as shareholders and executives arrived for the emergency meeting. Security was unusually tight, with ID checks at multiple checkpoints and private security personnel stationed throughout the building. Inside the main boardroom, Richard Whitman reviewed his presentation one final time. The strategy was simple: consolidate control, reassure major shareholders about the company's direction, and implement new voting rules that would effectively block Vanessa's takeover attempt. His legal team had worked through the night to ensure everything was technically within corporate bylaws, if not entirely within their spirit. "We're ready, sir," his chief of staff informed him. "The room is filling up." Richard straightened his tie and put on his most confident smile, the one that had closed countless deals and charmed investors through multiple crises. This would be no different. Just another fire to extinguish. The boardroom had been carefully arranged to project stability and confidence. The long mahogany table gleamed under recessed lighting. Fresh flower arrangements decorated the corners. Meridian's logo, a stylized wing symbolizing freedom and mobility, adorned the wall behind the chairman's seat, a not-so-subtle reminder of the company's long history and established position. As board members and major shareholders took their assigned seats, Richard worked the room, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries as if this were any normal meeting, rather than a fight for the company's future. He noted with satisfaction that security had been instructed to admit only pre-approved attendees, a list that most certainly did not include Vanessa Montgomery or her representatives. "Shall we begin?" Chairman Wallace Phillips called the meeting to order precisely at 9 a.m. "As you all know, we face an unprecedented situation that requires immediate action to protect shareholder value." Just as Richard moved toward the podium to begin his presentation, the boardroom doors swung open. Conversations halted mid-sentence as Vanessa Montgomery entered, flanked by her legal team and several people Richard didn't recognize. The security guards who should have stopped them were nowhere to be seen. "Ms. Montgomery," Richard recovered. "Quickly, this is a private meeting for current board members and approved shareholders." Vanessa smiled coolly. "As the holder of 43% of Meridian's shares, I believe I qualify." She handed a document to the corporate secretary. "My team's credentials and proof of share ownership, all verified by your transfer agent this morning." Murmurs rippled through the room. Richard's face flushed as he glanced at his CFO, who nodded grimly, confirming Vanessa's claim. "Well," Chairman Phillips adjusted his glasses nervously. "This is unexpected, but not irregular. Please have a seat, Ms. Montgomery." "Thank you," Vanessa replied, taking an empty chair directly across from Richard. "I've also invited several guests who have material information relevant to today's discussions." Before Richard could object, Vanessa's team had distributed folders to every person at the table. These documents outlined systematic discrimination within Meridian Airlines, approved and covered up at the executive level. Richard slammed his hand down. "This is outrageous. We're here to discuss corporate governance, not revisit a minor customer service incident that's been blown out of proportion." "Minor?" Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps we should hear directly from those involved." At her signal, Karen Patterson and Bradley Williams were escorted into the room by Vanessa's security team. Both looked uncomfortable in the formal setting, shifting nervously under the scrutinizing gazes of the board members. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard demanded. "These employees have no place at a board meeting." "Actually," Vanessa countered, "as the individuals whose actions initiated this situation, their testimony is highly relevant." She turned to Karen. "Ms. Patterson, would you please explain to the board your actions regarding my daughter's backpack on Flight 437? Karen looked desperately toward Richard, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "I was following company procedures," Karen stated flatly. "Which specific procedure required you to remove only my daughters properly?" "Stowed bag?" Vanessa pressed. Karen faltered. "It's more of an unwritten guideline about suspicious items." "Suspicious based on what criteria?" Vanessa pushed. When Karen couldn't answer, Bradley attempted to intervene. "We make judgment calls based on experience. It's impossible to codify every situation." Their contradicting explanations only worsened as questioning continued. Karen claimed she hadn't known Zoe was related to a first-class passenger, while Bradley admitted they'd been briefed on the seating arrangement. Karen insisted she'd been polite, while Bradley referenced the attitude problem that had justified their response. Board members exchanged concerned glances as the testimony unraveled. This wasn't the unified defense Richard had promised them. Seeing his advantage slipping, Richard made his move. This theatrical display is irrelevant to our purpose today, he turned to the board. What matters is that Ms. Montgomery is attempting a hostile takeover with no airline industry experience, driven by a personal vendetta rather than business acumen. Vanessa remained unruffled. My experience building successful companies speaks for itself. But if you're concerned about airline-specific expertise, she gestured to the people she'd brought with her. Allow me to introduce Eliza Chen, CEO of Pacific Skies, Marcus Johnson, former Meridian executive, and 3 industry consultants who've helped restructure major carriers worldwide. The board members straightened in their seats, clearly impressed by the credentials. As for a vendetta, Vanessa continued, I prefer to call it principled leadership. The documents before you show that discrimination at Meridian isn't an isolated incident, but a pattern that constitutes both moral failure and financial liability. Richard watched in growing alarm as several board members, including Devon, Taylor and Michelle Ramos, whom he'd counted as allies, nodded in agreement with Vanessa. The tide was turning against him. I move that we proceed with the scheduled vote on corporate leadership, Richard declared, hoping to cut short Vanessa's momentum. Seconded, said Vanessa calmly. And as I now control 43% of voting shares, I believe I'm entitled to representation in this decision. Chairman Phillips consulted with the corporate council, who nodded reluctantly. Ms. Montgomery is within her rights to force a vote on leadership. Richard felt sweat beading on his forehead but maintained his confident facade. He still had one final card to play, one that Vanessa couldn't possibly anticipate. As the room prepared for the vote, Richard approached the podium. Before we proceed, I have an important announcement. After careful consideration of Meridian's future needs, I've negotiated the sale of controlling interest to Global Airways International. He gestured toward the door as it opened again. May I introduce Mr. Jiang Wei, CEO of Global Airways, our new majority partner. A distinguished Asian man in an impeccable suit entered, followed by his executive team. Vanessa's expression betrayed surprise for the first time. Exactly the reaction Richard had hoped for. Mr. Zhang and Global Airways now control 52% of Meridian shares, Richard announced triumphantly. This partnership ensures our company remains in experienced hands and maintains our current leadership structure, with myself continuing as CEO. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Vanessa, whose carefully constructed plan appeared to have been outmaneuvered at the last moment. Richard couldn't suppress a small smile of satisfaction. Checkmate. Jiang Wei moved to the front of the boardroom with measured steps, his expression inscrutable as he surveyed the assembled executives and shareholders. Richard stood beside him, barely containing his triumphant smile. Thank you for that introduction. Mr. Whitman, Zhang began, his English precise and articulate. Global Airways International is indeed proud to announce our acquisition of majority shares in Meridian Airlines. Richard nodded encouragingly, eager for Zhang to continue reinforcing their alliance. We were impressed by Meridian's route network and fleet composition, Zhang continued. However, he paused, his tone shifting subtly. We were deeply concerned by the recent incidents that have damaged the company's reputation and stock value. Richard's smile faltered. This wasn't following the script they'd rehearsed. Therefore, Zhang announced, our first action as majority shareholder will be to commission a full independent investigation into discrimination allegations at all levels of Meridian's operations. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Richard grabbed Zhang's arm, whispering urgently, What are you doing? This wasn't our agreement. Zhang smoothly disengaged himself from Richard's grip. Our agreement was to protect shareholder value, Mr. Whitman. A company culture that tolerates discrimination is not only morally unacceptable, but financially unsustainable in today's market. The realization hit Richard like a physical blow. He looked across the table at Vanessa, whose composed expression now held a hint of satisfaction. Somehow she had known. Somehow she had planned for even this. I'd like to introduce someone familiar to many of you, Zhang continued. Isabella Chen, Global Airways Chief Strategy Officer. A woman stepped forward from Zhang's entourage, and Richard felt the blood drain from his face as he recognized her. Isabella Chen had attended the same business school as Vanessa Montgomery. They'd been photographed together at alumni events. In his rush to secure the deal with Global Airways, he'd missed this critical connection. Ms. Chen and Ms. Montgomery have presented us with a compelling vision for transforming Meridian Airlines, Zhang explained. Their partnership ensures the airline expertise Richard was so concerned about, while addressing the cultural issues that have damaged this company's reputation and financial standing. Richard looked desperately around the table for allies, but found only averted gazes. The board members who had stood firmly with him just days ago were now studiously examining the documents Vanessa had provided, avoiding eye contact. "This is absurd," Richard protested. "You can't possibly believe that a tech investor and a foreign airline understand our business better than the team that's built Meridian over decades." "Actually," Karen Patterson interjected unexpectedly, "the management team has been the problem." All eyes turned to her in surprise. Sensing her moment to save herself, Karen continued, "Mr. Whitman personally instructed us to give extra scrutiny to certain types of passengers. He said it was about maintaining our premium image." Bradley nodded vigorously. "That's right. There were unwritten policies. Richard told us we'd be protected if complaints were filed." Richard stared at them in disbelief. "That's a lie. You're trying to save yourselves by throwing me under the bus." "Is it a lie?" Vanessa slid a document across the table to Chairman Phillips. "This is an email from Richard to senior cabin crew, instructing them on maintaining cabin demographic balance, a euphemism for discouraging minority passengers from premium cabins. It was sent 3 days before my daughter and I boarded Flight 437. The chairman reviewed the document, his expression growing increasingly grave. "Mr. Whitman, this appears to be authentic." Other board members requested copies, each reading with obvious concern. Richard watched his support evaporate with each passing second. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current CEO," Michelle Ramos stated firmly. "Seconded," Devin Taylor added without hesitation. The vote was swift and decisive. Board members who had backed Richard for years now distanced themselves, eager to align with the new power structure and protect their own positions. "By overwhelming majority," Chairman Phillips announced, "the board has voted to remove Richard Whitman as CEO of Meridian Airlines, effective immediately." Security personnel appeared at Richard's side, not airline security, but Global Airways team. "Mr. Whitman, please gather your personal items. You'll be escorted from the building." As Richard was led toward the door, rage and humiliation overwhelmed his caution. He turned back to face the room. "You'll regret this. All of you. Especially you," he pointed at Vanessa. "You and your entitled brat think you've won, but you have no idea how to run an airline." The room fell silent at his outburst. Even those who had just voted against him looked uncomfortable at the naked hostility in his voice. "That's exactly the attitude that destroyed shareholder value," Isabella Chen observed calmly. "Attacking a child rather than acknowledging systematic failures." Richard's face contorted with fury. "You people are all the same, playing the victim while you take what others have built." The racial undertone in his statement was unmistakable. Multiple people reflexively reached for their phones. "Recording his meltdown." "Please continue, Richard," Vanessa said quietly. "Show everyone exactly who you are." Richard finally recognized the trap he'd walked into. With a last venomous glare, he allowed security to lead him from the room, the door closing definitively behind him. In the silence that followed, Zhang Wei addressed the boardroom. "I believe Ms. Montgomery and Ms. Chen have a transformation plan to present." Vanessa and Isabella exchanged a glance of mutual respect as they moved to the front of the room. The alliance they had formed, begun in secret months before Zoe ever set foot on Flight 437, was about to reshape not just one airline, but an entire industry's approach to equality. 6 weeks after the boardroom coup, Meridian Airlines headquarters hummed with renewed energy. The glass-walled executive suite that had once been Richard Whitman's exclusive domain now housed an open collaborative workspace where Vanessa Montgomery and Isabella Chen led daily transformation meetings. The mahogany-paneled walls had been replaced with digital screens tracking customer satisfaction employee engagement, and incident response times, metrics that had previously been hidden from view. The zero-tolerance policy rollout is complete, Marcus Johnson reported to the assembled leadership team. Every employee has received the new guidelines and completed initial training. Vanessa nodded approvingly. And the anonymous reporting system? Live and functioning, Isabella confirmed. We've already received 47 reports of past incidents that were previously suppressed. Each one is being independently investigated. Among the first actions of the new leadership had been placing Karen Patterson and Bradley Williams on administrative leave, pending full investigation. Unlike Richard's hasty firing of whistleblowers, this process was being conducted with transparent fairness, giving both flight attendants the opportunity to explain their actions and context. The transformation extended far beyond personnel changes. Every aspect of the airline's operations was being examined through a lens of equality and dignity. From booking systems to boarding procedures, from cabin crew training to customer complaint handling, nothing escaped scrutiny. We've reviewed the catering and comfort items data, reported the new head of customer experience. Premium cabins on routes to predominantly minority neighborhoods received fewer restocks and quality checks than identical routes to majority white areas. We've standardized protocols across all routes. These discoveries continued to validate Vanessa's approach. What had been dismissed as isolated incidents revealed themselves as systemic patterns once the data was properly analyzed and barriers to reporting removed. 3 months into the transformation, Vanessa stood before all employees in a company-wide address, streamed to every Meridian location worldwide. I know these changes have been significant, she acknowledged. Some of you may have wondered why an outsider would take such interest in an airline. Others may have worried about your jobs or the company's future. She paused, making eye contact with staff members in the front rows. I want to be clear. This transformation isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about building a company where every employee can work with dignity and every passenger can travel with respect. Many of you have been silenced by the previous culture, unable to speak up when you witnessed unfairness. Today, I'm inviting your voices to help shape Meridian's future. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Employees who had kept their heads down during Richard's tenure now stepped forward with suggestions for improvement. Flight attendants who had witnessed discrimination but feared reporting it shared their experiences and ideas for prevention. Ground staff identified processes that systematically disadvantaged certain passengers. One particularly meaningful moment came during the 5th month when Vanessa invited Zoe to attend a board meeting as an honorary junior member. The 12-year-old sat beside her mother, taking careful notes as executives presented their department's progress. When asked for her thoughts, Zoe spoke with the straightforward clarity only a child could offer. I think you should have kids test your systems. We notice things adults miss. This simple suggestion led to the creation of Meridian's Youth Advisory Council, with Zoe as its first chairperson, bringing fresh perspectives to the airline's family services and unaccompanied minor protocols. By the 6-month mark, the transformation had progressed enough to warrant public announcement of the rebranding. The Meridian name, tainted by its recent scandals, would be retired. In its place would stand Skyward Airlines, complete with a new logo, aircraft livery, and brand promise. Everyone belongs in the sky. The rebranding announcement coincided with several policy changes that made headlines across the industry. Former employees who had been fired after reporting discrimination were offered their jobs back with compensation for lost wages. A blind hiring process was implemented for all positions, removing names, genders, and other identifying information from initial applications. Unconscious bias training became mandatory, but unlike the performative workshops of the past, these sessions had accountability measures and follow-up assessments. We're not just checking boxes, Isabella explained to skeptical industry analysts. We're fundamentally changing how decisions are made. Perhaps most revolutionary was the establishment of an independent oversight committee comprised of diversity experts, customer advocates, and industry professionals. This committee had real power, the authority to investigate complaints, recommend policy changes, and even veto executive decisions that might adversely impact equality. As these changes took hold, Skyward's financial position began to stabilize. Initial costs of the transformation were offset by improved efficiency, reduced legal liability, and the return of customers who had joined the audio boycott Meridian movement. Industry analysts who had predicted disaster now cautiously upgraded their projections. The Skyward model appears sustainable, read one influential report. By addressing discrimination as a business problem rather than merely a PR issue, Montgomery and Chen have potentially created a template other airlines will be forced to follow. Vanessa was reviewing this report in her office when the head of security requested an urgent meeting. "We've detected anomalies in several computer systems," he explained, spreading documentation across her desk. Customer data being accessed inappropriately, maintenance records showing unauthorized changes, booking systems experiencing glitches that disproportionately affect certain routes. "Cyber attack?" Vanessa asked, immediately concerned. "No," the security chief replied grimly. "The access patterns suggest internal sabotage. Someone with extensive system knowledge is deliberately undermining our operations." Isabella, joining the meeting, immediately grasped the implications. "Richard?" "Unlikely," the security chief said. "His credentials were revoked immediately. This is someone still inside Skyward." Vanessa's phone buzzed with an alert. The company's stock had suddenly dropped 7% following a social media rumor that Skyward planes were experiencing maintenance issues. As they investigated further, more problems emerged. Crew scheduling conflicts that left flights understaffed, customer complaints being lost in the system, diversity initiative documents vanishing from servers. "We need to find this saboteur. Quickly," Vanessa said, "before they undermine everything we've built." The security footage played on the monitor in Skyward's operations center, showing a familiar figure entering the server room at 2:17 a.m. Bradley Williams, supposedly on administrative leave, used an access card that should have been deactivated to reach critical systems. For 37 minutes, he methodically accessed various terminals before slipping out again. "He's been doing this for weeks," the security chief explained to Vanessa and Isabella. "Always during the night shift. Always when security rotations leave a 3-minute gap in surveillance." "But why?" Isabella asked. "What does he gain by sabotaging us now?" The answer came the following morning when FBI agents arrived at Skyward headquarters with a search warrant. Their investigation revealed that Bradley hadn't been acting alone. Financial records showed regular payments from a shell company traced back to Richard Whitman, who had been orchestrating the sabotage from the shadows. More disturbing was the discovery that Richard had been heavily shorting Skyward's stock, betting against the company he had once led. Each incident Bradley created was timed to coincide with Richard's financial moves, allowing him to profit from the temporary stock dips that followed negative news. The FBI's cybercrime unit caught Bradley in the act during his next server room visit. When confronted with the evidence against him, he quickly offered to cooperate in exchange for leniency. "Richard planned everything," Bradley admitted during questioning. "He said we'd destroy the company's reputation, tank the stock, then buy it back at pennies on the dollar once Montgomery and Chen were forced out." Richard was arrested the following day on charges of corporate espionage, market manipulation, and conspiracy. The news of his arrest, coupled with the revelation of his scheme, actually boosted Skyward's stock as investors recognized that the operational issues had been sabotage rather than mismanagement. As the legal process unfolded against Richard and Bradley, something unexpected happened. Karen Patterson requested a meeting with Vanessa and Zoe. The conference room felt tense as Karen entered, noticeably thinner and more subdued than during their first encounter on Flight 437. "I've been watching everything that's happened," Karen began hesitantly. "The changes at the airline, the investigation findings, Richard's arrest, and I've been doing a lot of thinking." She turned to Zoe, visibly struggling to maintain composure. "I treated you horribly that day. There was no procedure that justified what I did. I singled you out because of assumptions I made based on how you looked." Her voice cracked. "I'm truly sorry." Karen then faced Vanessa. "I've seen how you've transformed the company without firing everyone who made mistakes. You've created accountability with the chance for growth. I don't expect to keep my job, but I wanted you to know that you've changed more than just policies. You've changed how people like me think." The sincerity in Karen's voice was unmistakable. After she left, Zoe looked thoughtfully at her mother. "Do you think people can really change like that?" she asked. Vanessa considered the question carefully. "I believe they can, when they're willing to honestly face what they've done and learn from it. That's why we're creating systems for accountability rather than just punishment." 6 months later, Karen Patterson became an unlikely advocate for Skyward's transformation. After completing extensive training and community service, she was reinstated in a new role, helping develop anti-discrimination training for frontline staff, sharing her own experience as a cautionary example. 1 year after the incident, on Flight 437, Skyward Airlines had become the industry standard for corporate culture transformation. Employee satisfaction scores reached all-time highs. Customer complaints about discriminatory treatment dropped to near zero. The company won awards for its innovative approach to inclusion, with case studies appearing in business school curricula worldwide. On the anniversary day, Vanessa and Zoe boarded a Skyward flight from San Francisco to Atlanta, the reverse of their fateful journey. As they walked through first class toward their seats, Zoe paused at a familiar overhead bin, now bearing a small plaque, reserved for future leaders of any background. With a smile, Zoe placed her purple backpack, the same one that had started everything, into the bin. The cabin crew and several passengers who recognized them broke into spontaneous applause. Later that day, in Vanessa's office, a news alert appeared on her screen. 2 major competing airlines had announced new equity initiatives modeled after Skyward's programs. Another carrier had hired away one of Skyward's diversity trainers to implement similar reforms. "It's happening," Isabella observed, reviewing the news with satisfaction. "The industry is following our lead." Vanessa nodded, thinking of how a moment of discrimination had sparked a movement that was now rippling outward, creating change far beyond what she had initially imagined. Zoe, who had been appointed as the official face of Skyward's Youth Advisory Board, was reviewing designs for a new kids' travel kit when she looked up at her mother. "Remember when you told me we were going to buy an airline?" she asked with a smile. "I thought you just meant the company, but you bought the whole idea of what an airline could be." Vanessa hugged her daughter, remembering the tears and humiliation Zoe had endured that day on Flight 437. From that painful moment had come transformation that would benefit countless passengers and employees for years to come. "Sometimes," Vanessa told her daughter, "the best response to discrimination isn't just standing up for yourself, it's changing the system so no one else has to face what you did." As they looked out the office window at a Skyward plane taking off, its new livery gleaming in the sunlight, they knew their journey had just begun. The airline industry was just the first sky they would transform together. The story of Vanessa and Zoe Montgomery teaches us that confronting discrimination requires more than individual courage. It demands systematic change. When faced with racial bias, Vanessa could have pursued the typical path of filing a complaint that would likely be buried or settled quietly. Instead, she recognized an opportunity to transform an entire system that enabled discrimination to flourish unchecked. True change often requires working from within. By acquiring Meridian Airlines rather than simply fighting against it, Vanessa gained the power to implement genuine reforms that affected thousands of employees and millions of passengers. Her approach demonstrates that addressing systemic racism demands structural solutions, not just awareness. The narrative also highlights the importance of building alliances. Vanessa succeeded not because she fought alone, but because she created a coalition of diverse stakeholders with shared values. By bringing together former employees, industry experts, civil rights advocates, and institutional investors, she assembled the collective leverage needed to overcome entrenched resistance. Perhaps most powerfully, the story reveals how moments of injustice can become catalysts for positive change that extends far beyond the original incident. What began as discrimination against one young girl ultimately transformed an entire industry, creating new standards and expectations that benefited countless others. Finally, Zoe's journey reminds us that children observe and internalize the discrimination they experience. By showing her daughter how to respond with strategic determination rather than helpless acceptance, Vanessa passed on the most important lesson. We don't have to accept the world as it is. We have the power to reimagine and rebuild it as it should be. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you could change the system instead of just complaining about it? Share your experiences in the comments below. What industries or institutions do you think need the Vanessa Montgomery treatment to address systemic discrimination? Comment justice if you believe one person really can make a difference when they refuse to accept the status quo. Like this video if Zoe's courage inspired you, and subscribe to hear more stories of people who transform moments of injustice into movements for change. Thank you for watching this journey from discrimination to transformation. And remember, sometimes buying the airline is the only way to ensure everyone truly belongs in the sky.